In our number 10 spot, we have Ramen Manuel. Chicago Mayor Ramen Manuel may be a shapeshifter reptile. I'll let you decide. In September 2012, during a press conference, viewers noticed that his eyes seemed to transform into, well, I'm not quite sure I know how to describe this because it's terrifying. Around his eyes, we see darkness of some sort, and suddenly his actual eyes become enlarged. Honestly, whatever happened wasn't human. Did he reveal himself as a shapeshifter reptile? I'm thinking yes. In our number 9 spot, we have Katy Perry. Okay, this is some crazy footage, y'all. I have obviously heard of the theory that celebs are really just reptiles, but like, damn, Katy Perry? I love her. I don't want to believe it. You can't make me. Okay, but for real, even if she is a shapeshifter reptilian, is it possible that she's not a bad one? I say yes. Anyways, in this clip we see Katy Perry's eye shift from blue to green and her pupils become slits for a second before she seemingly notices and looks away from the camera. Very sus, Katy. In our number 8 spot, we have Dove Cameron. Dove Cameron is an actress and extremely talented singer, most notably known for her Disney Channel show Liv and Maddie and The Descendants. Her voice is angelic, and personally, I'm a big fan. But regardless of my feelings, people speculate that she is a shapeshifter, or that a shapeshifter has taken over her body. One or the other. There is some recent footage of her doing an interview on the red carpet, and in this interview she has a moment where it seems as if she shifts a little. When you zoom into her eyes, it appears as if for a second her eyes reveal her pupils suddenly turning into a slit, just for a second, before turning back. It's really quite fast, but if you slow down the footage and zoom in closely, you can see it clear as day. So perhaps she has something weird going on with her eye, or perhaps she's actually a shapeshifter. Probably the latter. In our number 7 spot, we have Beyonce. Many are very suspicious of Beyonce apparently, and I had no idea. Apparently she is one of the most suspicious of the Hollywood celebs that people are pretty certain is a shapeshifter reptile, and it's because of a few different shots of her that reveal some pretty wild things. Apparently in one shot you see Beyonce singing, and suddenly the side of her face almost looks scaly. In another shot, Beyonce is dancing on stage and whipping her hair around, and for a millisecond you can literally see her face transform into a demon. I'm not joking, it's terrifying, and it's probably real. It's hard to believe her heavenly voice is even human, so most likely she's from out of this world. What do you think? Leave a comment in the comment section below. In our number 6 spot, we have Antique Roadshow Reptile. In this video, captured on camera, it is a regular episode of the BBC show The Antiques Roadshow, when, in the background, the camera captured a man staring at the camera. His eyes appear pretty large, being opened quite wide, and if you zoom in, it looks as if his pupils have slits. His eyes resemble a snake's eyes, revealing that he is obviously a shapeshifter snake. He doesn't appear to be with anyone, just hanging in the background, smirking at what he's observing. It's crazy to see this on camera, but I wonder if anyone has actually seen this in person. My suspicious brain would probs not even believe anyone, even if they did claim that they saw this in real life. I'd be like, show me that proof, or nothing. I'll just be sad. In our number 5 spot, we have the NBC shapeshifter. In 1995, there was reportedly an NBC News reporter by the name of Isaiah Carey who was in the middle of filming when he allegedly swallowed a grasshopper. What's eerie about this video is that if you zoom in, you can observe him having an abnormally large, somewhat pointy tongue, and the color is slightly green. The reporter had a very big reaction, which, I mean, if I swallowed a grasshopper, I would have screamed. Drama queen. But most people think that he turned away from the camera to hide his tongue, which does seem possible, but then again, no one wants to have something that gross documented on camera, so I would probably turn away too. Reptile or human? Probably reptile. In our number 4 spot, we have the Mexican schoolboy. In a video that was shared in September of 2018, there appears to be a boy and a girl, and a lot of chaos around them. Students leaving their seats and a lot of hustle and bustle when all of a sudden, the girl seems to turn into the boy, and the boy falls down and faints. She runs down the stairs, now as him, and then after 30 seconds on the ground, the boy, who's being approached by adults, he suddenly wakes up and begins to run at top speed away from the scene. Honestly, this one to me feels like it's straight out of a sci-fi show. I mean, at one part it does look like it's filmed on a phone, but for the most part it kind of gives me old Degrassi The Next Generation vibes, but maybe that's just me. Anyone else with me? But people say that it is real, and so all I have to say is that damn. Yep, that's all I've got. In our number 3 spot, we have the shape-shifting goat. In 2009, Nigerian police actually arrested a goat as apparently someone had shape-shifted into it. It was caught by vigilantes who were chasing 2 men who were trying to steal a Mazda car. They claimed that one of the 2 men escaped while the other used black magic to transform into a goat. Okay, this one wasn't caught on camera, but I thought you had to be told about this because I'm tripping out. Reportedly, the police said one of them escaped and the other turned into a goat. We cannot confirm the theory, but the goat is in our custody. This is the best one I've ever done. We cannot base our information on something mystical. It is something that has to be proved scientifically that a human being turned into a goat. Okay, so anyone else kinda hoping this story isn't true only because then the story is that a bunch of police arrested a goat? Honestly, I'm good with either story being true. In our number 2 spot, we have the alien security guard. In 2012, at the US-Israel Policy Conference, while President Obama was making a speech, there were cameras that were circulating around the area and they were shooting footage of the audience. From the front view, we see 2 security guards standing in the aisle. They look like, you know, they're most likely CIA agents. But then a camera shoots the security guards from behind, and one of them in particular does not look human from behind, as well as the camera catches him looking completely different than he does from the front. We see a bald man with no ears and a pointy chin. His nose looks short and rounded, and his eyes appear to be dark and quite sunken in. Most people think that because it was so dark and crowded that people would have missed this, and that the camera caught this shapeshifter in a blip of a moment in its true form. Many have concluded from this footage that the US is in cahoots with an alien race. And at this point, I'm pretty convinced too. What do you think? In our number 1 spot, we have the alleyway shifter. Okay, this clip is crazy. This is footage of a person that goes into an alleyway that is semi-lit and stands still. And then what appears to be a dark shadow leaves its body and walks away, and the person remains frozen. This clip is so controversial and has been a point of debate for some time now, but I'm not sure what you can even debate. You can clearly see someone or something leave the body and the body stays frozen in place. This clip is one of the most seemingly real clips out of everything I saw, but apparently all of the footage is real. Interesting. Very interesting indeed. Coming up in our number 10 spot, we have Chelsea Handler. Comedian Chelsea Handler has been accused of being a shapeshifter, and it's all because of footage that showed up online showcasing her in an interview, and when you zoom in close to her eyes, they appear for a moment to look like they turn into slits. This probably won't be surprising for you to hear if you watched parts 1 or 2 of the series, because it seems that almost all celebs could be reptiles. I don't know. She can be pretty funny, perhaps otherworldly funny. In our number 9 spot, we have Timothy GEITHNER. Former secretary to the treasurer, Timothy GEITHNER has been accused of being a shapeshifter. Why? Well, because there's some weird footage of him possibly doing just that. Footage was taken of him at a press conference sitting and listening to the speaker when all of a sudden something starts happening to his right eye. A weird pattern that honestly looks like a pattern that you would see on a butterfly wing starts to form around his eye, sort of cupping it. It seems that it happens for a few seconds before he realizes it and tries to cover it up by touching the area, and in an instant, it's gone. No one can deny that the footage is rather odd, especially as he touches the area and poof, it's magically gone. It is super possible that we have a butterfly shapeshifter on our hands. Imagine. If I could be a shapeshifter, that's what I would want to be. Something with wings. Probably a fairy. That would be great. In our number 8 spot, we have U.S. General David Petraeus. On June 15, 2010, the U.S. General David Petraeus appeared to faint during a conference, but at one point though, his face appeared to be, well, not human. The footage of this one does appear to be a tad blurry, but it does seem like something has happened to his face. His face looks like it's, deformed, and the person that was looking at him and talking before he fainted did look a tad scared. But it could have been because he could see something was wrong. So there's that. But also, at one point, somebody stood up and conveniently blocked the camera from seeing him, so that's sus. But honestly, the footage for this one is too blurry for me to say, yeah, probs are reptiles. But the people that filmed it and shared it definitely said that they saw something that day and it did not look human. In our number 7 spot, we have Lady Gaga. Okay, Lady Gaga is an interesting one because there is a video that seemingly shows something going on with her eyes, but also she literally said on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert that she, quote, has always liked to shapeshift. Very sus, Gaga. The viewers of the show thought that it was a very interesting choice of words, and so many thought that there was a bit of truth to what she said, as if the energy around the word held more weight. I don't know. Certainly there are so many people that believe that Lady Gaga has had contact with the devil, and so it would make sense if she was a shapeshifter. Remember that time she suspended something in the air with her magical force field? Okay, but for real, is she a magical devil-like being or a shapeshifter? Would love to know your vote in the comment section below. In our number 6 spot, we have Meghan Markle. Meghan Markle, actress turned literal princess when she married Prince Harry, has had quite some speculation around her over being a robot. Now, I've heard many things, including reptilian, and some people believe something has just, replaced her. But the robot shapeshifter is an interesting theory. It started when a clip went viral over Harry and Meghan wearing masks to promote Madame Tussauds new Harry and Meghan edition. But what made everyone feel the creeps is not just the fact that their facial expressions are unsettling, but also because Meghan is not blinking. Terrifying. Whereas Harry apparently was. Anyways, I think that this got everyone to start theorizing that even though this is a mask, she may actually be a shapeshifter robot, and you know what? I don't blame them. We're probs living in iRobot and don't even know it. In our number 5 spot, we have President Bush. Now, this is a clip of Papa Bush, the 41st president of the US, speaking in an interview, and his eyes seem to change. For those of you who don't live in North America, there is a George Bush Sr. and Jr., and they both became president of the US. Anyways, this clip is of George Sr., aka Papa Bush, and most people are in agreement that he is absolutely a reptilian. I mean, at this point, I'm starting to be convinced that all the politicians are, but who knows? Maybe the whole world is. Maybe I am. Honestly, I wish I could shapeshift. Then I would just shapeshift myself into a passenger that has a ticket to board a flight to Paris and peace out of here. You know what I mean? Anyways, in this clip, his eyes definitely form into slits, and there's no doubt that if this clip is real, and so many say that it is, then, he's definitely not human. In our number 4 spot, we have Aileen Wuornos. Aileen Wuornos, who is known as an American serial killer, did a number of interviews before she was executed on October 9th, 2002. During a number of her interviews, people claimed to have seen some weird shape-shifting happening. This is a clip of an interview that she did where her eyes appeared to show that infamous reptile slit. There is so many people that believe that sometimes shapeshifters are responsible for some of the worst crimes in the world, and then they just, shapeshift out of prison afterwards after taking over the body of humans. That's definitely an interesting theory. I mean, regardless, clearly Aileen was evil, so even if she's not a shapeshifter, I'm sure someone could make a case for her being possessed by a demon. In our number 3 spot, we have Reptile Woman. This woman has been dubbed Reptile Woman for pretty obvious reasons. The footage that was taken of this mystery woman surfaced online and was apparently not altered in any way. The footage seems quite normal until it's broken down frame by frame, and suddenly it's as if you see a different person. Her hands look different, her back, her face. lips and her eyes. It's fascinating. I personally wish the footage was easier to see, as it's not fully convincing me looking at something so blurry. It just makes me feel like it's been altered, but who knows? I may be wrong, and it sure seems like a lot of people believe that it's real. There have been a few people that have tried to debunk it, and truly I think I'm with them on their analysis. This one is too blurry for me to think that it's possibly real, but whatever. It might be. In our number 2 spot, we have M.W. Jeffrey Black Hodgdon. Let's call him Jeff, you know, for short. So Jeff is the Grand Master of the Masons in Massachusetts. Yeah, if you don't know anything about the Masons, then definitely have a Google sesh later tonight. That's a whole other rabbit hole in itself. But yeah, if you know anything about the Masons, then you probably won't be surprised that they are on this list. The Grand Master, the big guy calling the shots, is in this video, and he certainly shows signs of being a shapeshifter. From his eyes suddenly showing slits to his skin apparently showing evidence, there are a lot of people that believe that this guy is a shapeshifter. And in our number 1 spot, we have Britney Spears. Okay, this one I refuse to believe is real, because I love her. God, I do not want to believe it, but the footage certainly makes you think that it's possible that she's a shapeshifter, or that a shapeshifter at some point had taken over her body. That to me would check out more when you think of everything that she has been fighting for recently in terms of her freedom and gaining full control of her body back again. Who knows? Perhaps there is way more to it than we can imagine. I just love her though, so I refuse to believe that she was born a reptile. Anyways, in this shot, her eyes seemingly show slits at times, just like a lot of the other footage that we've shown, and this would point to some kind of reptile living within her.
Starting off our list in our number 10 spot, we have Warren G. Hooper. Warren G. Hooper was a 40-year-old state senator in Michigan. In this state in the 1940s, political corruption was a huge problem, and it was quite common for politicians and legislators to accept bribes in exchange for votes. After Warren confessed to accepting a $500 bribe for his vote on a horse racing bill, he was offered immunity if he testified as a witness in front of a grand jury. On January 11th of 1945, just a few days before his testimony was scheduled, Warren was driving to his home but never made it there. His car was found in flames shortly after on the side of the road, and the body of Warren was found in the front seat with 3 bullet holes found in his head. To make matters more suspicious, there were 2 other witnesses who were also supposed to testify in the same case, and they were both also found dead under suspicious circumstances as well. This is when a gang called the Purple Hill Gang began to come into the investigation. The Purple Hill Gang was a group that really controlled Detroit during the 1920s and 30s. There were rumors swirling that a former state treasurer named Frank McKay, who was under investigation in this grand jury case, was behind the killings of the witnesses, including Warren's. It was believed that Frank had bribed a deputy warden to temporarily release 2 of the imprisoned Purple Hill Gang leaders so that they could commit the horrible crime against Warren and then promptly return to the jail, which would give them a pretty solid alibi. 4 former members of the Purple Hill Gang did end up getting charged with conspiracy to commit murder because of the testimony of an informant that they had once approached him and asked him to take Warren's life. And while the 4 were convicted, they received quite short sentences, and one of the convictions was even later overturned.
In our number 9 spot, we have Nancy Pelosi. If you are someone living outside of America, then you may not know who this woman is. Nancy Pelosi is the Speaker of the United States House of Representatives. She's seemingly one of these politicians that you either love or hate, and the people that lean more on the hate side might also lean into this news a little too. Nancy could be a shapeshifter. Yep, a lot of people speculate over this as footage surfaced online showing her right eye doing something crazy when she was talking once. Something that is legit impossible. She's speaking and then all of a sudden it's like her eye rolls back and it becomes fully white with like a black dot slash slit in the middle, and then her real eye returns. It's very strange. This lasts for at least 1.5 seconds, enough that it's very, very noticeable. I don't know, man. If she's not a reptile, then she's gotta be something else, cause this is not human what I just saw. These videos are making me question everyone now. Every so often I have a moment and think, what if everyone is a reptile, and I'm amongst the few humans left? And what if their goal is to depopulate us and to continue to grow and populate themselves? It's a very trippy thought. In our number 8 spot, we have Rihanna. No, not Riri. I don't want to believe it. My Disney princess inner essence wants to believe in the good, and Rihanna is one of the good ones. She's not a shape-shifting reptile. But wait, actually, maybe being a reptile isn't a bad thing. Maybe there are good reptiles. Okay, all jokes aside, there is some sus footage of Rihanna out there that could have you convinced that she is possibly one of them and just shape-shifting to look like her beautiful self. In this footage, we once again see the transformation in her eyes like we have in quite a few other people's. But the thing is, the footage is rather blurry, so it's kind of hard to say that she fits in within this group. I'm gonna say she doesn't and just move on to the next one. That's my bias, because I like her. In our number 7 spot, we have a mysterious creature. Okay, this footage kind of makes me laugh because on one hand, it looks like someone dressed up in a costume playing a practical joke. But on the other hand, if it's real, then this is crazy. That is an alien-looking man out in broad daylight with white-ish eyes and green skin that's a bit textured with what looks to be triangles all over him that are different shades of green. It's curious that no one seems to notice him or his peculiar look. If I was standing beside this man and noticed him for the first time, I would, jump. Like do one of those. Which poses the question, is he just visible via camera and invisible in real life? That would be pretty nuts if that's the case. I did a lot of digging on this one and I haven't seen anyone debunk it yet, so I wonder about it. If this is real and there's aliens like him walking among us, then damn, we've been fooled. In our number 6 spot, we have the sports reptilian. Okay, your girl is not into sports much. I'm a fake Toronto Maple Leafs fan. I only watch them when they're winning, like the rest of Toronto though. All Torontonians do is complain about the Leafs until there's hope that they might do well. So, it's not just me. Anyways, so my point is that I know nothing about sports, or even what sport this footage was taken at, or even who this guy being interviewed is. All I know is the guy behind him is most definitely a shape-shifting reptilian. No way around it. This footage is great and you can see his eyes as clear as day and you cannot convince me otherwise. This guy is definitely not human. He's just casually hanging out behind whomever is being interviewed, and every so often the camera gets a clear shot of his piercing blue eyes that also have a black slit within them. Some people believe that the reptiles are intentionally revealing themselves in footage like this. Honestly, that theory would make sense because otherwise how could they let footage like this get out there? But anyways, this one is nuts. In our number 5 spot, we have Shakira. Pop star Shakira has been accused of being a shapeshifter reptilian. I mean, her voice is angelic and not very human-like, so it makes sense. I mean, her voice is angelic, so someone could argue that it's possibly not human-like. Video footage was taken of her speaking in an interview, and yep, you guessed it, her eyes change very briefly. Now, it is honestly not the easiest to spot as her eye color is quite dark and possibly also the lighting of the video might have sucked too, but when the footage is slowed down and analyzed closely, it does appear that something is going on. Her eye definitely changes, but is it a full-on slit like so many on this list? It's hard to say. Are there any celebs left that are human? In our number 4 spot, we have 2 aliens walking down the street. I honestly don't know what to call this one other than 2 aliens walking down the street because honestly, that's what it definitely seems like. Either they are aliens or they're people from some kind of Buffy the Vampire set, but apparently this footage is really random and that's why people believe it to be real. Supposedly these 2 men weren't near any kind of set or anything, and that's what makes this more mysterious. The men appear to have very big and different looking ears, darkened eyes, and a bigger nose than most people. Honestly, now that I think about it, they look like they just stepped out of Halloween Town. Tell me you know that movie franchise. It's amazing. We're big on Halloween at my house. Anyways, honestly, movies have made me close-minded to the possibility of seeing someone like this in real life, so it's so hard for me to believe that this is real, but Who knows? In our number 3 spot, we have glowing eye. Okay, this video makes me want to laugh, but honestly, I could also believe that there's something weird going on here. It appears that the footage was taken in some kind of cave, and the cave is somewhat dark in the distance, and all of a sudden you see 2 glowing orbs look out at the camera in the distance. Then it appears to give us a little bit more of itself, and it looks like it's a very weird shape, whatever it is. Is this a shapeshifter or Bigfoot or some other kind of weird thing our brains can't process? I don't know. Not gonna lie, it kinda looks like a giant frog. The round orb-like eyes would check out if it was a frog, and its arms kinda, resemble a frog's arms a bit. I don't know. I don't know why I did this. Do frogs stand like this? Maybe. All I know is this is definitely very strange footage, and that creature could be a shapeshifter. Or a giant frog. I don't know. In our number 2 spot, we have the Dr. Phil guest. For once, it's not a celebrity that revealed themselves as a shapeshifter, but this is an example of just a regular woman. In this footage, Dr. Phil is speaking to a guest, and all of a sudden the guest's eyes turn into slits. Imagine you were sitting on a live show and talking to someone, and all of a sudden you witness their eyes changing. Would you run and scream or just continue on with the interview? I mean, I think inside I would be screaming like a baby, but on the outside I'd look as cool as a cucumber. In our number 1 spot, we have Hillary Clinton. I bet you were wondering if I would ever touch on Hillary Clinton. Well, now is the time. Okay, not gonna lie, there are so many conspiracy theories tied to her being a shapeshifter, reptilian, alien, you name it. But this footage in particular could be nothing, or it could be something. In this footage, it appears that when Hillary takes a drink of water, her chin gets abnormally bigger, and not in a natural way. It appears to enlarge and
Starting off this countdown, we have the Hitchhiker's Killer. The Hitchhiker's Killer is the name given to serial killer Donald Henry Gaskins. He started his killings in 1969, where he would pick up hitchhikers to later kill them. It's believed that he killed more than a dozen people. But even before he went on this killing spree, Gaskins had a history of sick crimes. Finally, on November 14th of 1975, Gaskins was arrested after a man witnessed him killing 2 men and called the police. He was later sentenced to death, but this sentence turned into life imprisonment without any possibility of parole. However, his killings did not stop while behind bars. While in prison, he became the only man to have ever killed an inmate on death row.
In our number 9 spot today, we have Michael Mansfield. Michael was a 19-year-old student at Lincoln College in Illinois, and he lived with another student named Russell Smrekar. Russell ended up being expelled from the school after being charged with burglary for stealing a guitar and some record albums from another dorm room. After his theft, he had given the stolen albums to Michael, and in order to avoid being charged with possession of stolen property, Michael agreed to testify against Russell. This took place in 1975, and on New Year's Eve of that year, Michael was spending the holiday at his parents' house when he told them he was headed out to see a friend. Unfortunately, Michael was never seen again after this night, and of course, because of the loss of the witness, the charges were dropped against Russell. Although extremely suspicious, this alone of course didn't mean that Russell had anything to do with Michael's disappearance, but just you wait. In our number 8 spot today, we have Ruth Martin. Okay, you thought I was gonna leave you hanging with the last one, but I promise you that I am not. Shortly after Michael's disappearance that we just talked about, that same creep Russell was charged with stealing 3 steaks that totaled to $4 from a local grocery store. The witnesses to this crime were Jay Fry, who was a produce manager at the store, as well as a woman named Ruth Martin, who had seen Russell toss the steaks into his car after stealing them. Both Jay and Ruth were called to testify as witnesses, but on June 2nd, 1976, Ruth went missing and her abandoned car was later found with blood inside. 3 months after this, Russell broke into Jay's home and shot both Jay and his wife, which took both of their lives. He was caught for this crime and was sentenced to 300 years in prison. Okay, so what does this have to do with Michael and Ruth? Well, no one knew what happened to either of them until 10 years ago in 2011. Russell became terminally ill in jail and decided that then was the time for him to make some deathbed confessions, and he confessed to taking both of their lives as well. Unfortunately, neither of the bodies have ever been found, but it is absolutely insane to think that 4 innocent lives were taken over some stolen records and $4 worth of steaks. In our number 7 spot today we have David Kelly. David was a nuclear scientist and weapons expert. In 2003 he had an off-the-record conversation with a BBC journalist in which he explained that the dossier that the UK government had created in reference to Iraq's nuclear weapons capabilities was actually falsified. Despite this being off the record, the conversation was reported widely and ended up coming back onto David. Just a few weeks after this, David went for a walk in the woods near his home, but he never returned. Of course, search parties were sent out to look for him after his family was worried when he didn't return, and he was later found dead, but the circumstances were quite mysterious. Just a small trigger warning before heading into this next part, as it was ruled that he did take his own life. It is said that David had taken coproximol, which is a painkiller, and that he had also severed his ulnar artery in his left wrist with a pruning knife that he had since he was young. This is obviously horrific, but not necessarily the most suspicious thing, but here's where things get weird. Firstly, those who spoke to David that day explained that he seemed to be tired but was in good spirits, and despite being in a bit of trouble, he received a lot of support for his honesty. The weirdest thing is that neither the blister pack for the painkillers or the knife had his fingerprints on them. There were no fingerprints on them, which would suggest that the items had been wiped clean, which certainly would be very bizarre. Despite it officially being declared personally inflicted, many people believe that foul play was much more likely. In our number 6 spot today we have Mauro de Moro. Moreau was an Italian investigative journalist, and it is said that his profession is most likely what led to his disappearance. On the evening of September 16, 1970, he was coming back home from work but never actually returned. Before his disappearance, he apparently was convinced that he had the story of a lifetime, and he had even told his coworkers that he had a story that was going to shake Italy. There are 3 main speculations and theories about what this story might have been and what could have happened to him. One theory is that the story could have been related to the death of a man named Enrico, who was the president of Italy's state-owned oil and gas conglomerate ENI. The next was that his story could have been about finding a drug trafficking network between Sicily and the United States, and the final theory is that his disappearance might have been related to a failed right-wing coup that took place in the 70s. Despite extensive searches, he has never been found, and in fact 2 of the main detectives who started the case both had their lives taken by the mafia. It is believed that he was the victim of what is called a lupara bianca, which is a journalistic term for when the mafia takes the life of someone in such a way that their body will never be found. Whatever story he was working on, we'll likely never know, and it's such a tragedy that his job he was so passionate about is what most likely led to his disappearance. In our number 5 spot today we have Henry Baltimore Jr. In 1973, Henry was a 21-year-old honors student at the University of Michigan who had a very promising future ahead of him. In March of that year, Henry was unfortunately attacked inside of his apartment. 2 men broke in and tied him to the bed before stealing both money and material items. Henry was reluctant to report this incident to the police, but did end up doing so. After this, a suspect named Roy Davis was arrested and charged with armed robbery, and Henry was scheduled to testify at his hearing, but never showed up. 2 days after the hearing, Henry did resurface and asked the prosecutors to drop the charges because he was really frightened, but they refused and Henry was rescheduled to testify. 2 days before this rescheduled hearing, Henry ended up disappearing very suspiciously. Originally, people believed that he may have gone into hiding considering how vocal he was about being frightened, but that belief quickly went away and people began to suspect something a lot more sinister was at play. Henry's family especially knew something was wrong because there was no way he would disappear without telling at least one of them. Without Henry and his testimony, Roy ended up taking a plea deal and only was sentenced to 6 weeks. Roy was of course considered a person of interest in Henry's disappearance, and a neighbor of Henry's even said that they saw Roy and another man knocking on Henry's door the day that he disappeared, but Roy's mother offered her son an alibi, so Roy has never been formally charged for the disappearance. The 2 theories of what happened to Henry are either that someone abducted and took the life of him to prevent him from testifying, or Henry left Michigan, changed his identity, and assumed a different name. You would have hoped if it was the latter he would have at least told one member of his family. His case remains open almost 50 years later, and who knows? If someone out there who's watching this video knows something about this case, please call in and give any and all information over to the authorities. The remaining family members of Henry's deserve to know what happened to him. In our number 4 spot today we have Lena Chapin. If you're a fan of the show Unsolved Mysteries, this might be one you've you've already heard of. Lena and her 5 sisters were constantly moved around growing up depending on who their mother, Sandy, was seeing and where the new boyfriend or husband lived. Shortly before becoming a teenager, Lena and her family moved onto a farm owned by their 3rd stepfather, Gary. Gary apparently was actually quite a good stepfather and was quite kind to the girls, but after a few years, Sandy began to have an affair with a local 21-year-old, as well as writing bad checks on Gary's bank account. When Gary learned of this, he of course talked to a lawyer about a divorce, and shortly after this, Gary disappeared. Flash forward years later when Lena is 17, after keeping a horrible secret for all of those years and being filled with guilt, she comes forward to Gary's brother to tell him that she knows what happened to Gary. Lena explains that her mother Sandy had actually taken his life, burned his body, and made Lena help clean up the scene and all of the evidence, and then they drove down a country road and threw his bones out of the window. Unknowingly to Lena, Gary's brother Albert was actually recording this whole confession, which he of course hands over to the police. Now that the police are confronting Lena and her mother Sandy about this confession, since Lena is 17 and Sandy is still her legal guardian, Sandy convinces Lena to walk back her confession, and since it was recorded without her knowledge, it isn't admissible evidence. A few more years go by and Lena doesn't speak of the crime again and ends up getting a job, having a baby, and she lives with her boyfriend, and then right before turning 21 years old, which would make her of legal age to testify against her mother in court, she just disappears. Everyone in the family, especially her sisters, are convinced this disappearance has everything to do with her mother Sandy and was done to keep her quiet. While this mystery is still unsolved, it's extremely likely we all already know what happened to Lena, but we just need the evidence to prove it. In our number 3 spot today we have Oliver Munson. In January of 1983, a teacher from Baltimore named Oliver Munson purchased a used vehicle. Just a couple months later, Oliver was surprised to find out that the vehicle he purchased was actually stolen, and that the man who he purchased it from, named Dennis Watson, was actually the leader of an auto theft ring. Oliver of course had no idea about this dark history and agreed to testify against Dennis in court. Flash forward to February of 1984, just 3 days before Oliver is meant to testify against Dennis. Oliver leaves his home for work in the morning but never shows up at the school and ends up never being seen again. 3 days after he disappeared, his car was found 2 blocks away from his home with a flat tire, and shortly after this discovery, a stolen vehicle was discovered that had traces of blood in it, as well as a spent casing from a bullet. This vehicle also contained 2 receipts from a video store that had Oliver's name on them, which of course led authorities to believe he had been abducted and killed in order to prevent him from testifying. Unfortunately, because of lack of evidence, Dennis was never charged, and Oliver has never actually been found. This whole thing is of course so tragic, as Oliver was most likely a completely innocent party. In our number 2 spot today we have Clinton Glenn. Okay, I'm sensing a trend here. Apparently people who abduct and take the lives of people to stop them from testifying don't usually do that just once. Previous to Oliver, who we just talked about, Dennis had another shady happening in reference to a witness testifying against him. In 1973, a 29-year-old man named Clinton Glenn was scheduled to testify against Dennis at an armed robbery trial. The day before this testimony, Clinton was unfortunately found burned to death in a car that belonged to none other than Dennis. Dennis did end up getting indicted for this crime after another witness came forward, and we were so close to seeing some real justice, but the case ended up being dropped after this other witness died of a suspicious overdose. At some point you'd think all of this would end up getting Dennis charged and convicted with all 3 witnesses' deaths, but of course this is all circumstantial evidence, and it would be terrible to have seen him be acquitted of these crimes due to there not being enough evidence to pin him at the scene. To end off these horrible stories on an extremely creepy note, Dennis was convicted of auto theft and received a 10-year sentence, but after being paroled in 1989, he kind of just fell off the map and his whereabouts have been unclear since then. In our number 1 spot today we have Karen Silkwood. Karen Silkwood is well known for the worst reasons. She was an American chemical technician and a labor union activist who was very vocal and often raised concerns about the corporate practices that related to the health and safety of those working in a nuclear facility. You would think this is something that all of those working in the field would be concerned about, but apparently not. She worked a job making plutonium pellets and was the first woman on the union's negotiating team, and after she testified to the Atomic Energy Commission about the things she was concerned about, it was discovered that she had plutonium contamination on both herself and in her home. Plutonium isn't an issue outside of the body, but can easily be ingested or inhaled, which is when it creates a major major problem for humans. Karen was driving to meet with a New York Times journalist and an official of her union's national office after deciding to go public with some of her findings, and the people who saw her right before she left for this meeting saw her with a binder full of documentation of her findings. During her trip in her car there, Karen ended up driving off the road and striking a culvert, and this accident took her life. Here's where things get suspicious though. That binder I just mentioned was never found. It was said that Karen had fallen asleep at the wheel and almost twice the recommended dosage of methaqualone was found in her system, but there were clear skid marks on the road which suggested Karen was trying to get the car back straight on the road, and despite the accident being entirely at the front of the car, there was damage to the back of the car that friends and family say wasn't there before, and paint chips were found which would suggest a car had hit her from behind. To make this whole thing even more suspicious, apparently Karen was receiving threats before her passing. There have of course been claims of foul play and claims that she was run off the road by another vehicle, but unfortunately with little evidence these claims have never been able to be proven for sure. But what is for sure is that whatever really happened to Karen, it seems like a simple accident doesn't cover the full truth.
In our number 10 spot we have the Queen of England. Okay, your girl is British, and being so, us Brits just have a soft spot for the Queen, but apparently the rest of the world doesn't, and everybody seemingly thinks she's a shapeshifter reptilian hybrid. So that was news to me. Not only just the Queen, but a lot of people speculate over the entire royal family being reptilian hybrids. The reason being due to some footage that surfaced online that showcased the Queen being dressed in one of her cute outfits. But then all of a sudden they zoom in on her eye and you see her eye looking completely creepy. Honestly, the footage is terrifying, and I've watched enough horror movies in my life to recognize a demon when I see one, and her eye looked just a tad bit demon-like. Apparently people have said that her eye was just bloodshot. But yeah, I don't know about that excuse. They really should have said that she had some kind of eye disease, because that I would believe. I've had a bloodshot, probably at least plus 10 times in my life, and I've seen bloodshot eyes several times, and never have I ever seen anything that looks like that. Her entire eye is bloody looking. Honestly, it's as if perhaps someone punched her in the eye, except there's no swelling. It's very strange. So anyways, I see why people think she's possibly a shapeshifter.
In our 9th spot today, we have Glenn Stark Chambers. In January of 1975, Glenn Stark Chambers got into a heated dispute with his girlfriend, Connie Weeks. It ended with him taking her life. As a result, he was sentenced to death by electric chair, later reduced to life imprisonment. However, Glenn escaped prison on July 13th. Glenn, with 2 other inmates, ganged up to attack their detention officer and then escaped through a window. Now, he was captured 3 days later, but only to escape several years later. So he worked with the prison to help build furniture. He came up with a good idea to put himself into one of the boxes and have himself carried out of prison in a transport truck, and it worked. Even after 3 decades, Glenn has never been found. If he was still alive today, he would be in his 70s, so he could still be out there somewhere. In our 8th spot, we have Ted Bundy. Now, what was so scary about Ted Bundy is how smart he was. He was the definition of evil genius. So basically, he would use his smarts to manipulate women and then kill them. Bundy is said to be responsible for murdering 30 women, although it's thought that his number is much higher. Now, Bundy was actually able to escape custody multiple times. The first time, he jumped out of a 2nd-story building and fled while at the courthouse. He had planned this for days, practicing jumping from his top bed bunk in prison down to the floor to strengthen his ankles. Now, eventually he was caught, but then a while later he escaped again. This time, he forced himself to lose weight in order to squeeze through a hole in his cell ceiling. When he did escape the 2nd time, he went on to murder more women, until being caught once again. In our 7th spot, we have Charles Manson. Infamous cult leader Charles Manson, who led the Manson family cult, had his followers commit crimes and murders on his behalf. Some of his members committed a series of 9 murders in July and August of 1969. In 1971, Manson was convicted of 1st-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder for the deaths of 7 people, including film actress Sharon Tate. What's scary about Manson is that he was also an evil genius. If you've ever seen his interviews, he acts quite wild and strange. People think that he's out of his mind. At one point, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia and paranoid delusion disorder. But some people think that he was just too smart for his own good and he was just faking all of this. In 1971, Manson received the death sentence, but a year later, the government got rid of capital punishment, so his sentence was changed to life in prison instead. In our sixth spot, we have Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. Between 1963 and 1965, Ian Brady and Myra Hindley worked together to torture, take advantage of, and kill a number of young individuals. What they did was incredibly messed up, and it'll make your stomach churn. Now, these two were actually given the name the Moors Murderers because after taking the lives of their victims, they would bury their bodies on the moors outside of Manchester. Both individuals were sentenced to life in prison for their crimes. Ian was actually placed in solitary confinement, whereas Myra died in prison in 2002. We are now at our fifth and halfway mark with Lester Eubanks. In 1965, Lester was convicted of taking the life of Mary Ellen Diener. As a result, he was given the death penalty, which later got changed to a life sentence. Now, over the years in prison, apparently Lester changed his ways and became very well behaved. In fact, on December 7th, 1973, they let him go out to Christmas shop for his family. While out in a mall, he managed to escape his guards and flee. To this day, he still hasn't been caught. He's out there somewhere in hiding. Who knows where he fled to or what he's up to now. Coming in at number 4, we have Robert William Fisher. Now, this guy is one of the FBI's most wanted fugitives. He is on the run after a triple homicide and arson. On April 9th, 2001, Fisher took the lives of his wife and 2 children before blowing up their house. It is still unclear as to why he did this, and he's been on the run ever since. And police have no leads. On April 20th, his car was found in a forest near Payson, Arizona, but Robert was nowhere to be found. On November 3rd, 2021, Fisher was removed from the FBI's most wanted fugitives list. But despite them doing this, he still remains a very wanted fugitive. In our third spot, we have Bradford Bishop. Bradford Bishop Jr. is a former United States Foreign Service officer who is now a wanted fugitive. On March 1st of 1976, Bishop started to spiral after not receiving the promotion he really wanted. He then left his work early, drove to the bank, withdrew money, and then bought a sledgehammer, gas can, shovel, and pitchfork. He then returned home where he killed his wife, mother, and 3 sons. He then drove the bodies several miles away before burying them in a wooded swamp area before setting them on fire. As a result, he was placed on the FBI's list of 10 most wanted fugitives. They have no clue as to where Bishop is now. He could be anywhere, but they do believe that he fled to Europe. Moving on to number 2, we have Arthur Hutchinson. Arthur Hutchinson has lived a life of crime for murder, attempted murder, theft, and burglary. In fact, he spent 5 years in prison for the attempted murder of his half-brother. In September of 1983, he was brought into a police station after being arrested for theft. While there, he asked to go to the bathroom and then proceeded to jump out of the bathroom window and fled. He was on the run for 3.5 weeks. While on the run, he crashed a wedding and murdered the bride's father, mother, and brother. Later that day, he broke into another person's home and stabbed all 3 of the residents to death. He was finally caught on November 5th of 1983 and sentenced to life imprisonment. And in our number 1 spot today, we have Ahmed Siraji. From 1986 to 1997, Ahmed took the lives of 42 females. The bodies of his victims were found in a sugarcane field. What he would do was, after killing them, he would bury them waist deep in his field with their heads facing his house. He believed that by doing so, this gave him great power. But he was later caught and arrested alongside his sisters and 3 wives who helped him. One of his wives was actually sentenced to death, but that was later changed to life imprisonment. Ahmed, on the other hand, was sentenced to death by a firing squad in 2008.